Greetings and God bless. Welcome to another episode of Pastor Mike, Dynamic Voices for a Diverse Church, powered by The Witness, a Black Christian collective. I'm your host, Tyler Burns. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at BurnsClan. Please follow at your own risk. And joining me, as always, is the founder of The Witness. You know he has a very extensive bio. He is the man, the myth, the legend, the soon-to-be three-time best-selling author, Mr. Blue Check Verified himself, Dr. Jemar Tisby. What's going on, brother?
Doing well. You always forget the jamartisby.substack.com. So I'll just remind folks to follow and subscribe to jamartisby.substack.com at jamartisby.substack.com.
Hey, as I always tell people, there are some burdens God gave you. Then there's some burdens that you added for yourself. And I just chose to let go of that burden because I knew you were going to say it anyway. So literally, I thought about it. I was like, Jemar going to say the Substack.
He going to say it. Absolutely.
It's been a couple episodes since I said it. So he going to chime in and make sure. Hey, bro, it's fascinating. I was thinking about this. We are fast approaching and now at the 10-year anniversary of an event that really changed all of our lives and was a massive turning point, not just for this organization, but this entire country. And that is the killing of Mike Brown on August 9th, 2014. It's wild to think that it's been 10 years, bro.
It seems like a blink of an eye. I couldn't believe that it was going to be a decade since that happened, because I think, to your point, it was a turning point for many of us. And I still feel the ramifications of that day and the aftermath. And I honestly, I still feel like I'm leaning into the changes that it instigated for me personally and spiritually, for this podcast, for The Witness as an organization. I still feel we're fleshing it out, based on all the ripple effects of that killing.
I think the shocking thing is how monumental it was for us, but also how much it's faded in memory simply because there's been so many more hashtags after him.
Yeah.
So it's almost faded in our memory. I remember it was something we used to commemorate, and we used to pause and reflect on every August
every
9th.
Year. Yeah.
And then slowly but surely, you have so many days, dates, names to remember that you can no longer remember the same thing. You just don't have capacity to remember the same thing, or you don't choose to mark because of justice fatigue or exhaustion or whatever it may be. But this was really the moment for many of us.
Yeah.
I know some people would draw to all the way back to Trayvon Martin.
Well, they're connected.
They are connected. Yeah.
So Trayvon Martin is killed in 2012, and I was in seminary at the time. So I remember that murder being the first that I remember, like a pretty vigorous conversation in the church, in these white Christian circles about. And of course, it was dismissive. But then 2013, Trayvon Martin's killer is acquitted, and that births the hashtag Black Lives Matter. Then 2014, I think what made that moment so pivotal was that phrase Black Lives Matter became the new banner under which the present day Black freedom struggle marched under.
And I think it was also at that same time the Eric Garner video was released.
Yes.
But I think that was in 2013 or earlier in 2014.
Yeah, I think it was earlier in 2014. Yeah, it happened right around the same time.
So that video was released. So you had that video alongside what was happening in Ferguson. I remember when I read about Mike Brown's killing, I remember I read about it and I was sitting in a chair at my parents' house. And I was like, wow. And my dad was like, what's going on? I was like, the police shot and killed a young man in Ferguson. And I remember telling him, I remember telling him, this is going to be a big deal.
What made you think that?
It was something about the climate and also the murkiness of it, how it wasn't a clear-cut case. And then you could clearly feel post Trayvon Martin that the freedom struggle was boiling. It was brewing.
Yeah.
Like there was a simmering that was happening.
Yep.
And slowly but surely the amount of the temperature was being raised slowly but surely. And then beyond that, you saw how much the Twitter sphere and Black Twitter was kind of starting to take over
Yes.
And so when I found out about this on Twitter, I said, that's wild. And I remember I just simply posted, all I did was I just posted a link to the article, and I need to go back and find it. Man, praying for the young man and praying for the young man's family. It's tragic that this happened. Or some it was extremely general.
Yeah. Innocuous.
It
Yeah.
was completely innocuous. I was like, dang, I really hate that this happened. And the amount of people that jumped in my comments, I said, whoa. I said, how do you, number one, it's no way you know more about this, that much more about this than I do, because it
Right.
just happened.
Right.
And then how are you automatically assuming what's going on? It's like, wow, it's almost like y'all were there. Like you saw
Well,
video footage or something, or
yeah.
you knew what was going on, or what's going on here. That's when I was like, oh, okay, this is one of those moments. This is one of those massive moments that's going to mark us. But I had no idea how much, bro.
It was, I mean, you're bringing back so many memories. So, yes, there was still this simmering from Trayvon Martin. And particularly, I remember the 2013 acquittal was a Rodney King moment.
Mm-hmm.
Remember when every single officer got acquitted in his case, and the way the Black community and others were outraged at that. 2013 when Trayvon Martin's killer was acquitted, it was just like, can we get justice? And again, Black Lives Matter comes as really an outcry and a lament. When can we folks were obviously upset at the murder of Trayvon Martin, but it was insult to injury. It was acid in the wound to have the acquittal. So that was still simmering. And then comes the murder. One of the things that Mike Brown's killing, one of the things that we often forget, it they left his body in the street for hours.
Yes.
In the late
Yes.
summer heat and humidity of Ferguson, Missouri. And so imagine the trauma of seeing a neighborhood kid, right? Like these communities are tight knit. Seeing a neighborhood kid, his dead body being left out there in the public view. And then you brought up Twitter. And I think that's pivotal, because what was happening was we had folks on the ground doing real-time videos and real-time commentary, and then starting to use this hashtag Black Lives Matter so you could follow it all. And all of that coalesced into this moment.
Yeah.
And I remember the chant, hands up, don't shoot. There was this narrative going around that he had his hands up and all of this stuff. But it brought people together in protest and outrage like nothing I'd ever seen.
Yeah. I think it was also fascinating to watch how it was such a paradigm shifter for us in terms of the narratives we had to confront within ourselves.
Mm.
And I think it really especially in Black Christian spaces, we'll talk about specifically, it really kind of, the fault line was, which narratives are you going to embrace? Like, which narrative are you going to lean into? And so specifically, this whole idea, it really exposed respectability politics. And it really exposed this idea of, well, he did something to deserve this. There was something that he did to deserve this. And it was one of the first times that I had to theologically run through in my own practical, social, cultural application of the gospel. Do I believe that people's inherent dignity is dependent on what they may or may not have done, what they may or may not have been involved in? Should they still be treated with dignity, even if they may or may not have done such and such, or this or that? Is that enough for a death sentence? Is that enough for their lives to be snuffed out? And so it made me confront this narrative. And it also made me confront this narrative according to the stories and the narrative that we see in the life of Jesus. That how does Jesus treat those who are, quote unquote, according to society, considered guilty? You know, how does Jesus treat those who are, quote unquote, according to society, in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing? And so it was that point of theological confrontation for many of us that has marked us and really shaped the way we approach all manner of injustice and oppression and wrong and a miscarriage of justice to say, regardless of what you think, you're not going to tell me that this young man needed to be murdered. You're not going to tell me that. You're not going to tell me he
That's
needed to
right.
be killed in this way. And you're not going to tell me you had value for a young man whose body was left out in the heat for hours. You're not
Right.
going to tell me you have value
Right.
for him if these are the actions that you're
That his
taking.
life mattered. Yeah. This is what modern day lynching looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fundamental issue with lynching was, yes, the murder, but the extrajudicial murder. There was no conviction, there was no trial, there was no court case. It was the mob or those empowered to execute lethal force who took matters into their own hands. And we think that because folks have a badge and they felt threatened became the mantra for folks, right? We felt threatened. That is justification to take a human life. And so no matter what somebody did, they're entitled to their day in court. They're entitled
Yeah.
to a trial. They're entitled to due process. And we had to come to grips with that. And I also remember this is the time when I started realizing, oh, there's a difference between racial reconciliation and racial justice.
Mm,
So up until that point, most of my efforts around race had been focused around building relationships, getting people together, building bridges of understanding. And there's a place for that, for
so
sure.
so this is a question. Are you done with that? Is that something that you say you're no? And I'm asking this question legitimately. Like, is that something you say that the time has kind of passed on that for me?
For me, yes. So I will always use the term racial justice because that's what I mean. Now, I speak about in How to Fight Racism, I talk about the difference. I talk about biblical reconciliation, right? What does it really look like to have racial reconciliation? And because my critique of what evangelicals have done with racial reconciliation is they've made it all about interpersonal attitudes, nothing about systems and structures that would do something about a situation that brought about the death of Mike Brown. So for me, the point and the emphasis, particularly when my audience is white Christians, is we've got to work towards systemic institutional justice
Yeah.
and not just interpersonal relational aspects of it. But I don't fault folks who use the term racial reconciliation. My follow-up question was just, what do you mean by that?
Right. Right.
What
So it
about you?
did.
Are you using it?
No, I don't think I'm using that term, racial reconciliation. I don't think I've used that term in conversationally, but I don't know if I'm necessarily. I don't know where I fall on the do. Will I not do that ever again? I don't know if I'd say that. I think it's more so. I want people to have an idea and a view that embraces racial justice first, and then whatever comes after that is whatever comes after that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah,
I just want to triage it in the right way. I think that's been my conviction as of late, is to triage it in the right way, but not to give up on it completely.
for sure, for sure. That was also this era was a massive turning point for what became the Witness. I mean, we're still the Reformed African American Network, but it was a line in the sand of, like you were saying, which narrative would we embrace? And we had this post. We've talked about this on the 10-year retrospective, so I won't rehash it completely. But we had the opportunity to post something that basically said, "Well, Mike Brown had done something to deserve this. He brought it on himself, right?"
Right.
And we made the decision not to do that. And I think that was a critical hinge point in the life of the organization to truly be Black
Praise God
centered.
we didn't. Praise
Praise
God.
God, we didn't saved us. And because we would have lost all credibility, I think, as a Black centered organization, something that was a safe place for Black people to land and to vent and to learn and all of those things. And it was incredibly important for me personally, having been embedded in these white reformed evangelical spaces, absorbing this narrative around, the law enforcement is virtually unassailable, right? That of this assumption of Black criminality and Black threat that was in the air. And to be in an organization that said, no, 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 we truly do value Black lives. And here's how we do it. And here's how it shows up. I think that set us on a trajectory to eventually become the witness and to also be a critical voice for a lot of Christians, Black, white, and everyone, to start to think through this, because we were just starting in our generation to really think through matters of public justice and what does racial justice look
Right.
like in this era and not 50 years ago during the civil rights movement. So it was a critical moment in the life of the organization as well.
What are some lessons? Let's talk about some lessons that have remained true for us, that have stuck for us from the killing of Mike Brown to now, 10 years later. What's remained true and what's stuck? I think one of the things that stuck for me, I'll start out, is some people are just going to be determined to misunderstand you.
Mm,
You know, some people are not here to listen. Some people are not here to understand. They're not starting a conversation with you in order to really sit with your perspective. But some people are actually here determined to misunderstand you.
yeah.
That's stuck true, especially in the Christian space. There are some people I stopped talking to in that season. I still don't.
Whoa.
Simply because I have no interest or desire in having a conversation with someone in bad faith,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you cannot listen, especially on a perspective that you know nothing about. You airdropped into this perspective, like you don't know anything about. You don't live this. This isn't part of your natural focus. And I mean, we really have to really sit back and remember what this was like. That even the well-meaning white Christians, right? Even the well-intentioned white Christians were coming in and asserting authority in this conversation.
Mm,
It's so fascinating to me that they came in and asserted authority in this conversation by advising us in some cases what we should and should not talk about, how we should and should not speak, in order to get our names in the door, in order to stay at the table. Well, you don't need to talk about this. You don't need to talk about that. But I totally agree with you. But maybe if we approach it like this, maybe it's like, guys, this is not your thing.
mm-hmm.
This is not your space to lead in. You stay in your lane. Like, we will make the choice and we'll go down for it. If we go down for it, we go down for it. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is to get kicked out. Maybe the
Yeah.
point is to get run out. Maybe the point is for them to force us out. And maybe that's exactly what God desires. And that's actually a time for us to shake the dust off our sandals and keep moving. But
Well,
some people are
yeah.
just determined to misunderstand. We had a law enforcement situation not related to us outside of our church building um, a couple of weeks ago. And it was very fascinating that the officer, the lead investigator that I talked to, I introduced myself as a pastor, and I said, "Hey, is there any way we can support? Is there anything we need to be mindful of, wary of?" And he described the situation, which did not, according to even him, involve a threat to the officer's life. But what he said was, "Oh, well, this is why people ask why we're jumpy on traffic stops." And I'm like, my guy, like, it wasn't even, as far as I understand, which made me ask the question, is this an officer involved shooting? But it wasn't, according to what I know, and according to what he said. But I'm like, why is this narrative
Yeah. You don't have to
like
insert
already
that.
building the narrative around something that I just asked, what do
Pastor of
we,
a church is just
yeah,
saying, hey, can we help?
is there any way we can help? Is there any way we can support? Okay, all right, cool.
Wow. Determined to misunderstand.
Determined to misunderstand.
I would say, in addition to making that distinction between racial reconciliation and racial justice, the killing of Mike Brown impressed upon me the importance of studying history. This is really
Mm-hmm.
the season when I began to understand just how powerful history was to help us decipher our present context. So I distinctly remember reading an article on blackperspectives.com by Carrie Lee Merritt, who's an independent historian. And she wrote an article called One Continuous Graveyard. And she traced the origins of policing in the United States, back before the Civil War and afterwards. And it just gave so much context to how you have this predominantly Black community being policed by a predominantly white police force, the tensions that arise there, and the very long history of police brutality. So that, got me into learning about the Black Panther Party, which, of course, the full name was the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And the reason why they carried guns was to protect Black communities from the rampant police brutality that was occurring in their community by predominantly almost entirely white police forces, right? So understanding that something like Ferguson in 2014 has a history doesn't happen in a vacuum. And the way that history unlocks that continuity that we can see, and honestly, it lit a fire under me to want to be more active, more vociferous, more confrontational about it, because this ain't the first time. And it won't be the last unless we speak up about it. And knowing that history, understanding that folks have kicked the can down the road for generations on just this one issue of police brutality, right? That that made me feel like, oh, we got to take action now
Yeah.
because it is already too late.
Yeah, that's so good, bro. Another thing I learned was I really need to take care of myself.
Ooh, yeah.
Like mental health became a thing. And I didn't really understand it beforehand. Like I think beforehand I got it, but I didn't really get it until I really sat in the psychological impact of watching an inundation of Black death, dismissiveness, arguments, fights. I mean, the sheer amount of panels. And it was so fascinating, the amount of panels we used to be on.
Mm.
And then, it was also fascinating the panels people like you wouldn't get invited to. That was also fascinating too. But then the panels that we would be on and how it was like, man, in every panel, I got to fight to even assert to get to square one. Like I got to come in and justify. Like, so I already know, like if I don't get the questions in advance, I got to come in and talk about Black on Black crime. I got to talk about fatherlessness. I got to talk about abortion. And the psychological impact of constantly defending yourself to people who are determined to misunderstand you, but
Yep.
also people who are not really interested in changing their minds. I did not know what type of mental mental pressure
Mm-hmm.
and mental strain that will place upon my body and my soul. I just had no clue.
It weighs on you. It
I
weighs
had
on
no clue. I had no
you.
clue how it would affect my blood pressure, my everything, just being in those conversations, and how it just revealed how quickly, your body can go into fight or flight mode
Yeah.
because you've got to defend yourself constantly to people who you thought were friends, who you thought were close with you, thought,
Yeah.
and you've got to, I'm like, man, I'm having this conversation. I thought I was safe here. So I realized like I really got to take care of myself and I've got to really establish a rhythm of resistance that is also rooted in joy, and rooted
Yes.
in
Joy
enjoyment,
and justice. Yes.
so that I can actually do this work well.
That's a great word. That's a great word. It's about the long haul. It's about longevity. It's about the marathon, not the sprint. Because this is 10 years ago now. And guess what? We still very much in it. One of the lessons that the killing of Mike Brown taught me was silence is complicity.
Mm.
Remember when we were looking at so many pastors, particularly white pastors and Christian leaders, and just being like, yo, do y'all see this? Do you notice this? Are you going to speak up about it? And it wasn't the case of, oh, we just have too much going on. We haven't gotten to it yet. This is the national topic of conversation,
Yeah, yeah.
ongoing for weeks and months. And there's silence. There's silence on social media. There's silence that was especially deafening from the pulpit. I still have so many stories of Black Christians going to church, hoping, wishing, wanting their pastor just to say something, an elder, a church leader to say something from the front that says, we see you, that Black lives do matter. Even if we don't use that phrase, we're going to demonstrate that we care about this. We see y'all are hurting and we hurt too. And so many times there was not a word. And the reason for the silence was fear. The reason for the silence was, what is the fragile white person in our congregation going to say?
Right.
What will be the blowback if we use those three words together?
Exactly.
Black Lives Matter. So
Exactly.
that is what I mean is silence is complicity, is when it is a matter of justice, you're aware of it, it's within your power to speak up about it. The Black folks in your midst, you see they're hurting.
Mhm.
This is something, that's not just one regular news story, as tragic as many of those are. This is the subject of the movement right now.
Yeah.
And you've not said a thing.
It's
That was
been,
so painful.
I've always remembered that story from my first Joy and Justice conference where I was doing a workshop and there was a man in his 60s, a Black man in his 60s, and we were talking about kind of cross generational appreciation, generational appreciation, that type of thing. And he told the story, honestly, of he was in a white church and they asked him to pray, and he prayed a prayer about one of the hashtags and
Mm.
prayed a prayer for their families or something, and then someone yelled out from the audience, "That's enough!"
While he
They
was praying.
silenced him while he was praying. They silenced him.
Good Lord.
And I'll never forget him breaking down in front of us. And this man, who I'm sure was strong in that moment, broke down in front of us because it was safe for him to do that there. And I remember us praying for him and just how broken he was that he had been
60 years old.
silenced,
Man.
in his 60s,
Grown man.
a grown man, filled up the room with his personality, with a booming voice,
I remember
just,
him. Yeah.
he just a grown man, navigating that.
It reminds me of what precipitated the formation of AME when Richard Allen and Absalom Jones were there at St. George's
Yeah.
Church in Philadelphia. And during the prayer, one of the deacons tries to
Yeah.
force them to get
To
up
get
and
up.
move to the
Yeah.
segregated section of the church. And it's like, just wait till the prayer is done and we'll trouble you no more. And he's like, no, you must leave now. And so for this 60-year-old man to be interrupted during his
Wow.
prayer, which is, this became, we started talking about at this point, policing, the
Yeah.
tone policing, the policing that white evangelicals did, the policing of the compassion that you showed in that tweet when you prayed for his family. Remember when it was so controversial for Obama to say simply that if he had a son, he would look like Trayvon Martin,
Yeah.
right? Was nothing but truth. And it was nothing but an expression of compassion and empathy, right? And that folks just came after him, and they came after
Yeah.
us when we expressed any sort of compassion for Mike Brown, for Black lives, for Black communities. We had any critique of policing. So I say all that to say, in a sense, within certain circles, we've come a long way.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
actually have. Because the very basic conversations we were having 10 years ago, a lot of that's assumed now.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it, white people who would have just sort of elbowed their way into the conversation are listening,
Yeah.
or they're asking permission, or they're trying to earn the right to speak by demonstrating solidarity over the long term. Folks, even as simple as not automatically sharing the video of the beating or the killing.
Right.
Because to your point about mental health, about taking care of yourself, you don't need that to just spontaneously pop up in your feed and assail your senses. And people are
Right.
being more sensitive to that. Churches, particularly white folks who may not have spoken out about this before, are incorporating sermons about justice, book studies around these topics. They're listening to more Black authors. They're incorporating this into their prayers, into their Bible studies, into their Sunday schools, into their church membership classes, is what I would advocate. And so there has been change, and there has been shift, and there has been progress. I think ultimately what's happened is some people who had a more moderate position have changed their mind and become more vocal about racial justice. Others have sort of retreated into their camp. So a
Yeah.
lot of our churches are separated along these justice lines now. But like you said, maybe that had to happen. Maybe there had to be a sifting, if you will, in order for growth to occur.
Yeah. I think the final lesson I've learned, man, is that how important it is to have community on this journey, bro. Like
Yeah.
I think I realized at that point, this was in that moment. This is that moment where you and I became close.
Yeah.
Um,
In the trenches.
in the trenches, that's end of 2014 is when I joined PTM officially. It's a trenches moment, man. We were just sitting back like, bro, what do we do? Like, how do we make it? Man, you going through this? Man, that happened to you. I can't believe it. Like a space to be believed, a space to be heard, a space to be valued, a space to be listened to and cared for. And I don't think that's ever changed. We need that now more than we've ever needed it before. We need that. You need those spaces. Don't allow anybody to tell you you don't. You need those spaces where you can come and just receive. You need those spaces where you can come and be hugged, and what's understood doesn't need to be explained. And what people would need to have clarified, you're good. You already understand it.
Yes.
And I think that's just been a major thing for me, is just being able to sit in community and realize how essential it is. And also sit in community with us and not feel guilty about it. We have our space, we have our way, our movement. And if people want to join in, amen, cool, do your thing, but this is our space. And what a joy it is for it to be our space. And we set the temperature, and we pick what's on the menu, and we establish the ground rules. And it's a space of understanding for us first. And then whoever wants to get in and support that can, but it starts with us. Before, we would have always tried to calibrate to others, but now we're receiving for ourselves and loving each other. And that community has been essential, man. Some of the group chats that started back then, we still got them today. They're still around, bro. Like, people just don't realize how much it really concretizes who's on your team, who's with you, who's part of your community, and who needs to be the space that of people who challenge you and push back and tell you, bruh, you gotta think about this, or bruh, you gotta remember who you are, remember what you stand for, those types of things. So those spaces have been even more essential now as we've grown in the movement.
Community is what keeps you. Absolutely.
So 10 years later, some things have changed, but a lot of things, sadly, have remained the same.
I'm just glad that we have this space on Pass the Mic to talk about these things, to be a soft place for Black folks to land, to be a place where white folks who are interested can learn and absorb. And we want to continue being that space for you. So, share your thoughts, share your reflections, your retrospectives on 10 years after Mike Brown.
As always, if you want to support the podcast, patreon.com/pass the mic. We would love to receive your support. Keeps this podcast going. I think we got 10 more years in us as well. If God says the same, we got 10 more years in us if y'all keep supporting and keep listening. We love y'all. We'll see you soon on the next Pass the Mic.
Hey folks, Dr. Jemar Tisby here. I'm one of your co-hosts on the Pass the Mic podcast along with Tyler Burns. We've been doing this thing for 10 years now. This year's been an especially tough year, if I'm honest, but we do this because of you. And the only reason we can keep doing this is also because of you. So I'm encouraging you to visit patreon.com/passthemic and become a supporter of this show. For as little as $1 an episode, you can keep us going. Visit patreon.com/passthemic.